museum of boring things. Tonight's exhibit, the plastic grocery bag. Let us begin with a moment of silence, not out of reverence, but because the object in question has so thoroughly permeated every square meter of earth, a surface that one must listen closely to hear the faint crinkle of its genesis beneath the noise of everyday neglect. The plastic grocery bag, or as its patent literature would have it, the flexible tubular container, did not arrive fully formed in the checkout lanes of global commerce. No, it slithered there over the course of several decades, initially met with the suspicion one reserves for a synthetic jellyfish posing as a carriage for apples. The first conceptual ancestor of the plastic bag was not plastic at all. In fact, it was paper, and before that, bark, and before that, hands. Humanity, ever dissatisfied with simply carrying things with their own limbs, has been engineering surrogate containers since prehistoric times. But the true precursor to our star exhibit emerged in the 19th century with the industrial paper bag. Patented in 1852 by Francis Wolla, a Pennsylvanian schoolteacher with a pressing desire to accelerate the transport of groceries, though presumably unaware that his invention would one day be crushed by polyethylene and a confused public debate about turtles. Fast forward to Sweden in the early 1960s, the spiritual birthplace of the modern plastic bag. It was here, under the fluorescent lights of Celloplast AB, that engineer Sten Gustav Thulin developed what would become the archetypal one-piece polyethylene bag. The design was astonishingly simple, a folded, welded tube of high-density polyethylene with die-cut handles, yet brilliant in its cold, crinkly efficiency. Thulin's bag used far less material than paper counterparts, weighed almost nothing, and could theoretically be reused ad infinitum by individuals with exceptional memory and moral stamina. The Celloplast patent was filed in 1962, establishing what would eventually metastasize into a global standard, albeit one largely ignored in its country of origin, where the object remains quietly stacked in drawers labeled for dog poo. Celloplast AB, like many European firms of the mid-century, found itself in the position of inventing something useful, just in time to have it appropriated by larger markets with looser patent enforcement. In the 1970s, American and British grocery chains began experimenting with the plastic bag as a low-cost alternative to paper, seduced by its tensile strength, water resistance, and the way it folded flatter than a hummingbird's moral compass. Supermarket managers, always alert to the opportunity to offload operational burdens onto the consumer, took note of the bag's ability to self-distribute, that is, to be both container and consumer problem in one. Unlike paper bags, which demanded counter space and sympathetic handling, plastic bags required nothing more than an indifference to entropy and a checkout hook. By the late 1970s, Mobil Oil, the petroleum giant better known for lubricating internal combustion than internal conscience, entered the plastic bag market with its own high-density polyethylene variants. Around the same time, the now iconic t-shirt bag, form factor, a delightfully misleading name suggesting one might wear it in public without legal consequence, was introduced, allowing handles to be punched from a single sheet with minimal waste. Its shape, incidentally, bears uncanny resemblance to ancient Mesopotamian grain sacks, proving once again that human innovation often loops around like a confused ferret in a tube maze. Polyethylene, the material in question, had itself been discovered accidentally in 1933 by British chemists Reginald Gibson and Eric Fawcett at the Imperial Chemical Industries Laboratory. Their initial attempts to polymerize ethylene gas under high pressure resulted in what can only be described as an accident of industrial whimsy, a waxy white substance with excellent insulating properties, and crucially a molecular structure conducive to mass production once someone figured out how to do it on purpose. It took until the 1950s for high-density polyethylene, HDPE, to become a viable industrial material made through the Ziegler-Natta catalyst process, a name which sounds like a Viennese pastry, but is in fact a complex organometallic reaction involving titanium chloride and aluminium alkyls. This allowed for stronger, more rigid polymers, the ideal recipe for a bag designed to hold 40 lemons while pretending it cannot handle 2 jars of pasta sauce. The engineering tolerances of the typical HDPE plastic bag are, despite appearances, impressive. A bag weighing just 5 grams can support over 17 kilograms of weight, assuming it is not poked, torn, crumpled, or emotionally blackmailed into giving up. The mechanical properties of HDPE include high tensile strength, resistance to moisture and many chemicals, and an alarming slipperiness when attempting to open it with wet hands in a checkout line, while the cashier regards you as one might regard a man attempting to milk a stapler. As production ramped up, the machinery followed suit. Modern plastic bag manufacturing involves high-speed extrusion of HDPE resin pellets, which are melted and blown into giant tubular bubbles, resembling something between a jellyfish migration and a ghost caught in a wind tunnel. These tubes are then flattened, cut, and heat-sealed into bags at astonishing speed, with some machines capable of producing over 100,000 units per hour. This process, while mesmerizing, is not without its quirks. Extruder nozzles occasionally clog, requiring what the industry terms manual intervention, a euphemism for a man with a coat hanger and a resigned expression. The die-cutting blades must be kept sharp and calibrated to avoid producing bags with what is known as handle ears, flaps that catch in dispensers and cause otherwise composed shoppers to resort to language typically reserved for cursed printers. Despite their humble appearance, plastic bags became a battlefield for branding in the 1980s and 90s. Chains began printing logos, slogans, and sometimes promotional trivia on their surfaces, transforming each bag into a tiny billboard that wrinkled in protest at its own message. Some featured smiling sun faces, others the menacing simplicity of "thank you," repeated ad infinitum in red Helvetica, as though the bag itself were trapped in a loop of coerced gratitude. These early branding attempts were surprisingly expensive. Multicolor ink adhesion on polyethylene is a challenge akin to painting on a soap bubble, and were often limited to the upper middle tier grocers who wished to seem both thrifty and cheery, like a clown with a calculator. The international spread of the plastic bag was less a march than a seepage. By the mid-1990s, they had become nearly universal in both developed and developing economies, with production measured in hundreds of billions annually. Yet even then, alternatives lingered. In Germany, the cloth tote retained cultural prestige. In Japan, hyper-efficient folding bags persisted with origami-like precision. In certain rural markets of India, newspaper and jute reigned supreme, but the HDPE bag was indifferent to tradition. it advanced not by popularity, but by inertia, a triumph of logistical convenience over cultural resistance. Thus ends the first portion of our investigation. What began as a folded tube in a Swedish engineer's mind has already begun to stretch its handles across the globe. The next segment, naturally, will address the tightening grip of mass production and its unintended consequences, both material and metaphorical. For now, the bag hangs, slightly translucent, quietly rustling in the stillness of the archive, waiting. The rustle becomes a roar, the one so thin and high-pitched it registers only to dogs, physicists, and those few souls who have worked the graveyard shift at a polyethylene extrusion plant. By the late 1980s, the plastic bag had not only outcompeted its rivals in the grocery aisle, but it spread laterally into every conceivable sphere of human transport. Pharmacy chains, hardware stores, souvenir shops offering miniature Eiffel Towers made in Shenzhen, and even ecclesiastical gift shops selling candles wrapped in synthetic contrition. To understand this proliferation, one must consider not just engineering, but logistics. The globalization of plastic bag manufacturing mirrored the rise of containerized shipping and petrochemical vertical integration. Polyethylene resin, derived from ethylene, itself extracted during the steam cracking of naphtha or ethane, could be produced in massive quantities in petrochemical hubs such as Houston, Rotterdam, or Abu Dhabi. These resins were then pelletized, bagged, ironically, and shipped to converters worldwide, who transformed them into bags in local facilities. The process was modular, brutally efficient, and entirely opaque to the average shopper, who, upon receipt of a free bag with their purchase, would seldom contemplate the 14,000-kilometer journey its atoms had made to cradle their instant noodles. In terms of manufacturing, the process reached a kind of sublime industrial elegance. Film extrusion became increasingly computer-controlled, allowing for fine-tuned adjustments to thickness, microns, not millimeters, film clarity, tensile yield strength, and elasticity. An ideal grocery bag must neither split when overfilled, nor stretch so far as to leave the user dragging their goods home like a sad marsupial. Achieving this balance required constant monitoring of extrusion temperatures, cooling roll speeds, and corona treatment strength. The latter being a high-voltage method of oxidizing the bag surface to allow ink to stick. Without corona treatment, logos would smear like lipstick on a mirror after an earthquake. Bag handles, often overlooked in polite society, became a focus of R&D. Early versions used simple punch-outs. Later iterations featured gusseted sides and reinforced seams, giving rise to a minor arms race among bag producers eager to promise double strength or reinforced grip. Some even ventured into drawstring variants, a doomed experiment that suggested a lack of understanding about how humans interact with bags, groceries, and time constraints in parking lots during rainstorms. Mechanical failures in plastic bags, while infrequent, were a persistent concern. The primary modes of failure were threefold. 1. Seam splitting under load, typically due to undercalibrated heat sealers. 2. Punctures from sharp corners, such as cereal boxes or judgmental cucumbers. And 3. Stress fatigue after repeated reuse, an act attempted primarily by the noble, the thrifty, or the criminally forgetful. Engineers employed dart drop tests, a standardized method of measuring film toughness involving a falling hemispherical projectile to ensure compliance with durability metrics. These tests, while not inherently dramatic, occasionally led to incidents involving rogue darts and startled lab technicians. Meanwhile, industry consolidation began to rear its inevitable head. The 1990s saw the rise of mega providers, corporations capable of producing billions of units annually. Names such as Hilux Poly, USA, Novalex, or Superbag began to dominate procurement contracts. Proprietary blends of HDPE, LDPE, low-density polyethylene, and even LLDPE, linear low-density polyethylene, were marketed like fine wines, each with different coefficients of stretch, opacity, and moral defensibility. The introduction of metallocene-catalyzed polymers further enhanced bag performance, producing films that could stretch like taffy, yet remain puncture-resistant. A scientific miracle largely wasted on wrapping a single bottle of barbecue sauce and a stick of gum. Standardization became both necessity and battlefield. ISO 7765, ASTM D709, arcane designations that govern test methods and failure tolerances, entered the lexicon of procurement officers and quality control engineers. Supermarkets now demanded not just a plastic bag, but a bag conforming to specific load capacities, dimensions, and printing fidelity. A typical specification sheet for a mid-tier bag supplier might include over 24 parameters, including melt flow index, MFI, gloss haze, and coefficient of friction, the latter affecting whether the bags would obediently separate from one another on a dispenser or cling together like shy octopuses. Parallel to these technical developments, the culture of the bag shifted. Whereas once they had been invisible accessories to commerce, bags began to attract attention, not out of admiration, but suspicion. In 1997, the term urban tumbleweed was coined in reference to plastic bags caught in the wind, a poetic turn for a waste product. Images of plastic bags swirling through alleys, caught in fences, or drifting across deserts began to take root in the public imagination. They were no longer merely bags. They had become symbols of excess, of thoughtlessness, of the slow erosion of the natural by the petrochemical. Municipalities responded. San Francisco, never one to miss an opportunity for regulatory leadership, became the first major U.S. city to ban plastic checkout bags in 2007. Others followed. Ireland introduced a bag tax in 2002. South Africa regulated thin bags as illegal, and Bangladesh banned them outright in 2002 after they were found to have clogged drainage systems during monsoon floods. The backlash was global, scattered, and uneven, a kind of polymer Protestant Reformation. The plastics industry, unamused, responded with educational campaigns highlighting the bag's efficiency. They correctly pointed out that plastic bags require less energy to produce than paper, emit fewer greenhouse gases, and consume less water. A typical HDPE bag, they argued, used 70% less energy to manufacture than a comparable paper bag. Unfortunately, the bags had also been used to strangle an entire generation of sea turtles, metaphorically speaking, which made their PR efforts feel somewhat like trying to charm a court jury with a pie chart. Recycling programs for plastic bags proved a logistical Gordian knot. HDPE film is recyclable, in theory. In practice, its low weight-to-volume ratio, contamination with food residue, and tendency to jam sorting machines made it a recycler's least favorite guest. Bag bans and bag taxes proliferated not because they were the most effective environmental policies, but because they were visible, graspable symbols of doing something. Meanwhile, the bags themselves remained largely unchanged, except for the addition of the occasional meaningless green leaf icon and the word eco printed on one side in hopeful Helvetica. There were attempts to engineer a more sustainable successor. Bioplastics entered the stage with dramatic flair and disappointing results. Bags made of PLA, polylactic acid, starch blends, or oxo-degradable additives appeared briefly in the mid-2000s, like avant-garde dancers with terrible balance. PLA degraded only in industrial composters, which most cities lacked. Oxo-degradables simply fragmented into smaller pieces, an impressive display of semantic gymnastics, if not actual progress. Some manufacturers experimented with bag-for-life concepts, thick, woven plastic monstrosities that crinkled like origami armor and were marketed with the subtlety of a wellness coach. These, too, often ended up discarded, albeit with a slightly higher probability of being used to transport garden waste before retirement. Thus, by the turn of the 2010s, the plastic bag existed in a kind of quantum state. Both villain and hero, indispensable and disposable, object of scorn and necessity. Supermarkets quietly began charging for bags, not so much as punishment, but as an invitation to guilt. Customers carried jute totes with ironic slogans. The bags still rustled behind checkout counters. Nobody made eye contact. It is here that we find ourselves, halfway between ubiquity and obsolescence, standing in the silent echo of industrial efficiency misunderstood. The next phase of our study shall trace how this most crinkly of objects navigated regulation, branding reinvention, and the curious human habit of hoarding them under the kitchen sink, just in case. The hoarding instinct, long attributed to squirrels and cable news anchors, found an unexpected ally in the plastic grocery bag. As regulations tightened and cultural attitudes shifted, the domestic stockpiling of bags became a low-level anthropological constant. Across continents, in drawers, bins, and cupboards, millions of bags nested within each other, like petroleum-based Matryoshka dolls, compressed into wrinkled polyhedra of contingency. We might need them, went the unspoken justification, though nobody could quite specify what for. Wrapping shoes in luggage, picking up dog waste, that strange leak under the sink, a child's last-minute book cover, emergency hat in a rainstorm, a makeshift glove for dealing with life's less agreeable textures. This curious halfway point, the bag neither banned nor embraced, present but resented, created a kind of subterranean economy of reuse. In Germany, the toot survived longer than expected, partly due to engineering stubbornness and a population statistically predisposed to folding things neatly. In Japan, supermarkets introduced multi-pocket dispensers so that customers could sort their used bags by size and purpose. In rural India, bags were ironed flat, stacked, and sometimes even rented. In the United States, they were pushed into cylindrical under-sink bag holders, which themselves became a market category, meta-accessories for disposable items. Capitalism, as ever, found a way to monetize ambivalence. Meanwhile, manufacturers were not idle. Faced with regulatory pressure, many engaged in what might be called syntactic alchemy, renaming their products with ever more abstract terms: single-use carry-out item, consumer transport sleeve, or in one brave instance, flexible utility envelope. These terms helped lobbyists obfuscate the issue during hearings, confusing lawmakers into arguing with themselves over what exactly they were regulating. This tactic, while not novel, proved highly effective in jurisdictions where policy decisions are made faster than sandwich orders. On the technical side, the late 2010s ushered in incremental but notable innovations. Multi-layered co-extrusion techniques allowed for films with different functional strata. Inner layers optimize for strength, outer layers for print clarity or compostability. Some designs incorporated calcium carbonate fillers to reduce plastic content, achieving nominal environmental points while increasing opacity to the point where one could smuggle a brick of cheese with complete deniability. Others introduced vent holes, not for function, but to appease retail staff, convinced that trapped air was stealing shelf space. At the same time, retailers experimented with biodegradable and compostable alternatives, often under the delusion that the average customer had access to a commercial composting facility, or the faintest idea what industrial composting conditions entailed. Bags marked biodegradable frequently degraded only in theory, or worse, fragmented into microplastics faster than one could say eco-friendly. The result was a perverse system in which green-tinted deception cost more and functioned worse, but sold better. The branding of plastic bags, once a footnote in grocery logistics, evolved into a theater of guilt and projection. Early slogans had promised convenience and gratitude. Now they promise penance and recycled virtue. This bag is 40% post-consumer material, one might read, while the other side warned ominously, "Reuse me, I'm watching." Some designs featured pastoral illustrations, grass, trees, improbable rabbits, as though to imply that the bag had been grown, not extruded. Others simply embraced fatalism, stating this is the last bag you'll ever need, a claim which proved difficult to verify without divine intervention. Legal strategies evolved in lockstep. Bag bans were implemented or seldom absolute. Exemptions proliferated for meat, for medicine, for produce, for dry cleaning, for restaurants, for compostable liners, for bags used to wrap other bags. These exemptions created gray markets and strange behavioral adaptations. Customers double-bagged when they could, hoarded when they couldn't, and occasionally brought their own bags made from denim, canvas, or in one tragicomic case, chainmail. Enforcement was patchy. Retail staff, caught between corporate policy and human exasperation, developed a 1,000-yard stare, usually reserved for battlefield medics or substitute teachers. Simultaneously, statistical surveillance of bag usage became a new frontier. Retailers tracked average bags per customer metrics, correlating them with demographic and regional data. Marketing analysts discovered that bag usage spiked during weather alerts, sports events, and Valentine's Day. One retailer even discovered that bag demand rose slightly when certain songs played on in-store radio, a phenomenon still unexplained, possibly the result of Pavlovian conditioning or mass delusion. Engineering advances tried to keep pace with regulation and reuse. Handle reinforcement ribs were added to prevent tearing. Bottom gussets were widened to accommodate larger items. Some bags began to incorporate RFID tags, either for anti-theft measures or to assist with in-store automation. The idea that a plastic bag might have a data profile, be scanned, monitored, or rejected by an algorithm was either the apex of progress or the absolute nadir of civilization, depending on one's opinion of both bags and algorithms. Plastic bags also began to leave Earth, not metaphorically, but quite literally. NASA, in the ever-pragmatic spirit of space exploration, utilized polyethylene bags aboard missions for waste containment and equipment insulation. The bags performed admirably in microgravity, though one did once become lodged behind a console aboard the International Space Station and remained there for 3 weeks, resisting retrieval with what one astronaut described as a tenacity unbecoming of trash. In the developing world, plastic bags proliferated in ways that mirrored and occasionally exacerbated infrastructure challenges. In many regions lacking formal waste collection, the bags served as ad hoc packaging, rain barriers, and eventually, regrettably, pollutants. Urban drainage systems choked. Livestock ingested them. Open fires released clouds of noxious polymer fumes, and yet their alternatives, jute, canvas, paper, were often more expensive, less available, and arguably more water-intensive to produce. The perfect solution eluded everyone, like a shopping trolley with one functional wheel. The international debate became one of symbol versus substance. Was the plastic bag the cause or the symptom? Its mass, minute. Its presence, omnipresent. Its function, undeniable. Yet it remained the focus of legislation, documentaries, beach cleanups, and social media campaigns, often photographed mid-tangle in a tree, flapping like a banner of surrender. By the dawn of the 2020s, a strange detente had emerged. Bags were charged for, but not banned. Bioplastics were encouraged, but not trusted. Reusable bags were championed, but seldom washed, and the original polyethylene grocery bag, thinner now, slightly more translucent, often recycled in word if not in deed, continued to serve its purpose with the quiet plastic dignity of an object that had never asked to become a political metaphor. And so it waits again, folded, tucked into the corner of a drawer, wrapped around itself like a sleeping cat, until the next emergency, errand, or inexplicable need demands its return. The next section shall delve into its standardization, not the moral kind, but the literal. ISO codes, global sizing templates, and the mathematical limits of gusset geometry. Standardization in the world of plastic grocery bags is not a glamorous affair. There are no award galas, no tearful thank you speeches, and certainly no commemorative stamps. Yet behind the scenes in the fluorescent lit basements of packaging consortiums and regulatory bodies, a quiet and relentless war has been waged over dimensions, tolerances, and thicknesses, the kind of battle that unfolds in spreadsheets rather than blood, though the emotional toll on auditors should not be underestimated. The standard grocery bag, in its globally dominant form, is known in some circles by the code 16 barrel, a designation referring not to barrels in the maritime or alcoholic sense, but rather to the volume of dry goods it can approximately carry, measured by someone in the mid-20th century, who probably hadn't expected their calculations to outlive them. The average 16 barrel bag measures about 11.5 inches in width, 6.5 inches in side gusset, and 21 inches in height, though these numbers may be adjusted slightly depending on jurisdiction, supplier, and national anxieties about bulk yogurt. Standardization is vital not merely for consistency, but for machinery. Automated bagging systems, those cold mechanical hands that open, load, and seal bags with the indifference of a disenchanted butler, require precise alignment of handle cutouts, bottom seals, and film discrepancy of even 0.5 millimeter can cause catastrophic bag jams, leading to stoppages, staff intervention, and eventually, depending on union strength, pastry-fueled breakdowns in morale. Manufacturers must therefore conform not only to the customer's expectations, but to the tyranny of the machine, which tolerates neither deviation nor sentiment. To ensure compliance, the industry leans heavily on standards bodies such as ASTM International and the International Organization for Standardization, ISO. These institutions produce documents of Byzantine complexity, with titles such as ISO 527-3, Determination of Tensile Properties of Films and Sheets, or ASTM DAA2, Test Method for Tensile Properties of Thin Plastic Sheeting. Reading one is akin to being slowly suffocated by an accordion made of bureaucracy, and yet within these labyrinths lie the precise conditions under which a plastic bag must stretch, resist tearing, and recover from deformation, assuming the bag has any interest in rehabilitation. One of the more charming footnotes in this saga is the bag drop test, a simple but oddly theatrical procedure in which a standardized weight, often a sand-filled box, is dropped into a bag from a fixed height to observe whether it survives. The test simulates real-world abuse, such as the average person dropping a liter of milk into their bag while arguing about receipt length. The results are recorded on scoring sheets with categories like seam rupture, handle elongation, and catastrophic film failure, the latter of which sounds more exciting than it is. Equally arcane is the dart impact resistance test, measured in grams force, where a small projectile is dropped onto the bag film to simulate puncture pressure. A good bag will flex and absorb the impact, like a seasoned diplomat avoiding confrontation. A bad bag will tear immediately, releasing the sound of failure, followed by an audible sigh from the technician, who must now recalibrate the machine for another test run. Over the decades, refinements to these tests have become so precise that they rival aerospace standards in complexity, albeit applied to an object that might spend most of its life wrapped around a banana or slowly disintegrating behind a radiator. Standardization also applies to printing, an oft-forgotten battlefield. The printing process must balance ink adhesion with film flexibility, resulting in rigorous color fastness protocols and rub-resistant scores. Bags printed in full CMYK color must pass crinkle tests, where the bag is repeatedly folded, scrunched, and abused to ensure that the branding does not smudge into a postmodern expressionist mess. The rise of flexographic printing, a method which combines speed clarity and moderate disappointment, allowed mass production of branded bags with legible text, though the actual slogans printed upon them often displayed less thought than the plastic molecules beneath. Then there is the question of static electricity. Plastic bags, by their nature, cling to themselves and others with the fervor of an insecure first date. Static charge buildup in bag stacks can impede automated dispensing, cause minor shocks, and occasionally attract dust with such enthusiasm that they resemble neglected lint collectors within hours. To mitigate this, manufacturers add anti-static agents to the resin blend or apply coatings, resulting in a delicate chemical ballet designed to let the bag exist peacefully with its peers in a retail environment. This anti-static property must also be measured and standardized, lest a regional supermarket chain begin receiving complaints that their bags have developed the personality of a balloon rubbed on a cat. In terms of global trade, standardization becomes even more surreal. The European Union has attempted harmonization of plastic bag definitions for tariff and customs purposes, resulting in a categorization system that treats bags differently based on thickness, intended reuse, and even how long they're expected to survive. Thus, a 50-micron bag may be treated as a durable shopping unit in Finland, a lightweight carrier in Portugal, and as contraband in parts of California. The average bag, having no passport or personal agency, is unaware of these distinctions and behaves identically across borders, despite the legal storm clouds swirling above its handles. One must also acknowledge the truly international reach of the plastic bag standard template. Though originally designed for Western-style retail, the 1/6 barrel format, or local equivalents, have been adapted for use in street markets and Lagos hawker stalls in Kuala Lumpur, corner kiosks in Buenos Aires, and remote outposts of the Australian interior. In many of these contexts, the bag is not merely packaging, but infrastructure, water container, baby sling, roofing patch, emergency rain hat, and in one documented case, flotation device for a clutch of bewildered ducklings. Yet even within this global homogeneity, local flourishes endure. In Taiwan, plastic bags are often made deliberately thicker to comply with reuse mandates. In Kenya, the very possession of a non-compostable bag can result in a hefty fine or jail time. In Iceland, bags are sold in monochrome austerity, reflecting the national temperament. And in India, certain cities require bags to be compostable and colored blue, for reasons that appear to combine municipal pride with spiritual obligation. From a materials standpoint, the industry is settled into a narrow but durable range of polymer specifications. Most bags remain HDPE, though some markets favor LDPE for its softness and transparency. Recycled content is now a major variable, often dictated by law or public pressure. The addition of post-consumer recycled PCR resin introduces variability in film quality, sometimes giving the bag a faint scent of its previous life, but also enables brands to print virtuous percentages on the side in bold font often larger than the store's name. In truth, the standard plastic bag is one of the most tightly defined consumer products on earth, not by prestige or performance, but by sheer force of necessity. It must cost less than a cent to make, support several kilograms of groceries, survive atmospheric humidity, resist ultraviolet degradation for weeks, allow for branding, comply with half a dozen overlapping regulations, and then, ideally, disappear. It is the unsung gymnast of packaging. Bendable, foldable, printable, disposable, reliable, and ultimately forgettable. But let us not be too quick to dismiss the quiet dignity of conformity. In the next section, we shall examine what happens when the plastic bag attempts reinvention, a journey into luxury variants, designer collaborations, reusable hybrids, and the uncomfortable collision of fashion and waste. By the time the 21st century reached its second awkward adolescence, somewhere between artisanal vinegar startups and orbital billionaires, the plastic bag had become a scapegoat so culturally entrenched that it nearly forgot it was made of hydrocarbon chains and not original sin. Its sins, of course, were visible, measurable, photogenic. Unlike invisible emissions or abstract deforestation, the plastic bag was delightfully tangible in its offense. It danced on highways, clung to tree branches like festive shame, and filled the bellies of unfortunate seabirds with a commitment most people could only envy. And so came the reckoning, a wave of regulatory, scientific, and symbolic assaults on the humble polyethylene vessel, each wave breaking upon the same rocky shore. The fact that the bag, despite everything, was remarkably good at its job. Let us begin with the environmental numbers. A typical single-use plastic bag, weighing about 5 grams, requires around 0.48 megajoules of energy to produce, roughly the amount needed to boil half a kettle of water. In exchange, it can carry up to 20 times its weight and be reused several times before inevitable relegation to the drawer of last resort. Its carbon footprint, life cycle-wise, is lower than that of paper bags, which demand water, bleaching, and bulk transport, and even certain reusable bags, unless those are, in fact, reused with ecclesiastical regularity. Yet the crime of the plastic bag was never what it consumed, but what it became: litter. Its aerodynamic irresponsibility made it a favorite of the wind and an enemy of gutters. Once airborne, it joined the ranks of the windborne waste category, a euphemism which, in practical terms, translates to an all-expenses-paid tour of municipal shame. Drainage systems choked. Agricultural fields collected polyethylene like static cling. Mangroves sighed under the weight of branded embarrassment. Enter the public campaigns. Schools hosted anti-bag poster contests, resulting in millions of drawings of sad turtles and confused dolphins. Politicians gave solemn interviews beside heaps of translucent regret. Celebrities carried their groceries in jute sacks and whispered urgently on morning talk shows about microplastics, having read precisely 1.6 articles. All the while, the bags remained defiantly neutral. They had, after all, never asked to be dropped on the sidewalk or flushed into storm drains. They were, in a sense, victims of poor aim. Then came the bans, some symbolic, others impressively punitive. Rwanda outlawed plastic bags in 2008 with such thoroughness that airport customs began confiscating duty-free items if they arrived wrapped in polyethylene. Kenya followed in 2017 with an even stricter ban, threatening manufacturers and importers with up to 4 years in prison. This earned them applause from environmental groups and quiet admiration from nations whose legislative backbone had dissolved into paperwork. In Europe, bag levies proved effective. Ireland's 2002 plastic bag tax, a modest 0.15 per bag, led to an immediate 90% drop in usage, proving what economists had long suspected, that people would drag their groceries home barehanded before willingly paying for a plastic carrier. The psychological shift was stunning. Bags were no longer a neutral component of retail. They were a luxury, a vice, or a mistake. Those who brought their own were treated as eco-warriors. Those who forgot were publicly shamed by thin-lipped cashiers and forced to buy new reusables, thereby unwittingly creating their own private bag economy. And yet, despite the bans, the alternatives often failed to match the original in sheer unspectacular excellence. Paper bags tore in the rain and devoured forests. Cotton totes had carbon footprints that required decades of uninterrupted chickpea transport to offset. Bioplastics demanded industrial composting facilities which, in most municipalities, existed only in the PowerPoint presentations of overworked planners. The bag, like a banished ghost, kept returning in disguised forms. Thicker, labeled reusable, offered with a wink. Scientists joined the fray, armed with lab coats and funding proposals. Studies proliferated. One team in Canada traced the movement of plastic bags across urban landscapes by tagging them with GPS chips, revealing that they could travel up to 30 kilometers in a day when caught by wind, a feat rivaled only by confused ducks and Uber drivers with poor navigation. Marine biologists documented bag ingestion in over 700 species of animals. Soil scientists discovered plastic fragments altering microbial ecosystems. The term plastosphere was coined to describe the new microecology forming on plastic surfaces in the ocean, complete with bacteria, algae, and presumably judgment. Yet amidst all this scrutiny, the bag revealed a cruel truth. It was only the beginning. The plastic bag, visible and blamable, distracted from the deeper complexity of plastic pollution. Microbeads, tire wear particles, synthetic fibers from clothing, fishing gear, all contributed to the rising tide of environmental plastic with far less theater. The bag was merely the ambassador of a deeper malaise, the human tendency to produce, forget, and blame. Corporations responded with the usual cocktail of innovation and evasion. Some began offering closed-loop systems, take-back programs in which used bags were collected, washed, pelletized, and reincarnated as new ones. Theoretically elegant, practically expensive, and ultimately niche. Others invested in chemical recycling, a process involving pyrolysis or gasification to break polymers down into fuel or feedstock. This attracted funding, fanfare, and a low conversion efficiency that delighted nobody except brochure designers. Amid the chaos, a new acronym rose: EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility. Under this principle, manufacturers would be held accountable for the end-of-life fate of their products, including the humble bag. In some regions, this led to mandatory take-back schemes, labeling requirements, and financial penalties for non-compliance. In others, it led to greenwashing on an industrial scale. Eco-friendly bags made with 2% seaweed extract and 98% marketing budget. Then came the truly experimental solutions: bacterial enzymes capable of digesting polyethylene, fungi cultivated to break down plastic films in high humidity environments, genetically modified mealworms with a taste for shopping bags. The world seemed increasingly willing to hand over its waste problem to organisms with more patience and fewer spreadsheets. So far, none have scaled commercially. The bag endures. As of the late 2020s, the world stands at a strange equilibrium. Global plastic bag production has declined slightly, not vanished. Alternatives have proliferated, yet none have dethroned the original in cost, convenience, and sheer omnipresence. The average consumer, confronted with a shelf of reusables, biodegradable experiments, and opaque price tags, still occasionally whispers the ancient incantation: "Do you have a bag?" And the bag, always faithful, always quiet, is there, uncelebrated, unrepentant, and utterly brilliant at holding things. And we shall turn from plastic to people, the economic and labor structures behind this global object. Who makes the bags? Who profits? Who shoulders the burden of our throwaway ingenuity? By the time the 21st century reached its second awkward adolescence, somewhere between artisanal vinegar startups and orbital billionaires, the plastic bag had become a scapegoat so culturally entrenched that it nearly forgot it was made of hydrocarbon chains and not original sin. Its sins, of course, were visible, measurable, photogenic. Unlike invisible emissions or abstract deforestation, the plastic bag was delightfully tangible in its offense. It danced on highways, clung to tree branches like festive shame, and filled the bellies of unfortunate seabirds with a commitment most people could only envy. And so came the reckoning, a wave of regulatory, scientific, and symbolic assaults on the humble polyethylene vessel, each wave breaking upon the same rocky shore. The fact that the bag, despite everything, was remarkably good at its job. Let us begin with the environmental numbers. A typical single-use plastic bag, weighing about 5 grams, requires around 0.48 megajoules of energy to produce, roughly the amount needed to boil half a kettle of water. In exchange, it can carry up to 20 times its weight and be reused several times before inevitable relegation to the drawer of last resort. Its carbon footprint, life cycle-wise, is lower than that of paper bags, which demand water, bleaching, and bulk transport, and even certain reusable bags, unless those are, in fact, reused with ecclesiastical regularity. Yet the crime of the plastic bag was never what it consumed, but what it became: litter. Its aerodynamic irresponsibility made it a favorite of the wind and an enemy of gutters. Once airborne, it joined the ranks of the windborne waste category, a euphemism which, in practical terms, translates to an all-expenses-paid tour of municipal shame. Drainage systems choked. Agricultural fields collected polyethylene like static cling. Mangroves sighed under the weight of branded embarrassment. Enter the public campaigns. Schools hosted anti-bag poster contests, resulting in millions of drawings of sad turtles and confused dolphins. Politicians gave solemn interviews beside heaps of translucent regret. Celebrities carried their groceries in jute sacks and whispered urgently on morning talk shows about microplastics, having read precisely 1.6 articles. All the while, the bags remained defiantly neutral. They had, after all, never asked to be dropped on the sidewalk or flushed into storm drains. They were, in a sense, victims of poor aim. Then came the bans, some symbolic, others impressively punitive. Rwanda outlawed plastic bags in 2008 with such thoroughness that airport customs began confiscating duty-free items if they arrived wrapped in polyethylene. Kenya followed in 2017 with an even stricter ban, threatening manufacturers and importers with up to 4 years in prison. This earned them applause from environmental groups and quiet admiration from nations whose legislative backbone had dissolved into paperwork. In Europe, bag levies proved effective. Ireland's 2002 plastic bag tax, a modest 0.15 per bag, led to an immediate 90% drop in usage, proving what economists had long suspected, that people would drag their groceries home barehanded before willingly paying for a plastic carrier. The psychological shift was stunning. Bags were no longer a neutral component of retail. They were a luxury, a vice, or a mistake. Those who brought their own were treated as eco-warriors. Those who forgot were publicly shamed by thin-lipped cashiers and forced to buy new reusables, thereby unwittingly creating their own private bag economy. And yet, despite the bans, the alternatives often failed to match the original in sheer unspectacular excellence. Paper bags tore in the rain and devoured forests. Cotton totes had carbon footprints that required decades of uninterrupted chickpea transport to offset. Bioplastics demanded industrial composting facilities which, in most municipalities, existed only in the PowerPoint presentations of overworked planners. The bag, like a banished ghost, kept returning in disguised forms. Thicker, labeled reusable, offered with a wink. Scientists joined the fray, armed with lab coats and funding proposals. Studies proliferated. One team in Canada traced the movement of plastic bags across urban landscapes by tagging them with GPS chips, revealing that they could travel up to 30 kilometers in a day when caught by wind, a feat rivaled only by confused ducks and Uber drivers with poor navigation. Marine biologists documented bag ingestion in over 700 species of animals. Soil scientists discovered plastic fragments altering microbial ecosystems. The term plastosphere was coined to describe the new microecology forming on plastic surfaces in the ocean, complete with bacteria, algae, and presumably judgment. Yet amidst all this scrutiny, the bag revealed a cruel truth. It was only the beginning. The plastic bag, visible and blamable, distracted from the deeper complexity of plastic pollution. Microbeads, tire wear particles, synthetic fibers from clothing, fishing gear, all contributed to the rising tide of environmental plastic with far less theater. The bag was merely the ambassador of a deeper malaise, the human tendency to produce, forget, and blame. Corporations responded with the usual cocktail of innovation and evasion. Some began offering closed-loop systems, take-back programs in which used bags were collected, washed, pelletized, and reincarnated as new ones. Theoretically elegant, practically expensive, and ultimately niche. Others invested in chemical recycling, a process involving pyrolysis or gasification to break polymers down into fuel or feedstock. This attracted funding, fanfare, and a low conversion efficiency that delighted nobody except brochure designers. Amid the chaos, a new acronym rose: EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility. Under this principle, manufacturers would be held accountable for the end-of-life fate of their products, including the humble bag. In some regions, this led to mandatory take-back schemes, labeling requirements, and financial penalties for non-compliance. In others, it led to greenwashing on an industrial scale. Eco-friendly bags made with 2% seaweed extract and 98% marketing budget. Then came the truly experimental solutions: bacterial enzymes capable of digesting polyethylene, fungi cultivated to break down plastic films in high humidity environments, genetically modified mealworms with a taste for shopping bags. The world seemed increasingly willing to hand over its waste problem to organisms with more patience and fewer spreadsheets. So far, none have scaled commercially. The bag endures. As of the late 2020s, the world stands at a strange equilibrium. Global plastic bag production has declined slightly, not vanished. Alternatives have proliferated, yet none have dethroned the original in cost, convenience, and sheer omnipresence. The average consumer, confronted with a shelf of reusables, biodegradable experiments, and opaque price tags, still occasionally whispers the ancient incantation: "Do you have a bag?" And the bag, always faithful, always quiet, is there, uncelebrated, unrepentant, and utterly brilliant at holding things. In the next section, we shall turn from plastic to people, the economic and labor structures behind this global object. Who makes the bags? Who profits? Who shoulders the burden of our throwaway ingenuity? The plastic bag, that crinkling whisper of capitalism, does not simply materialize beneath checkout counters like a consumerist mushroom. No, it must be manufactured, shipped, handled, taxed, occasionally cursed, and then either discarded or hoarded in kitchen drawers by real people. A global choreography of hands machines, ledgers, and machines that sometimes replace hands but never quite replicate the swearing. The story of who makes the bag is one of global asymmetry, a term economists use when they are trying to avoid the phrase structural imbalance with geopolitical undertones. Bag manufacturing, particularly for the low-cost, high-volume retail sector, is overwhelmingly outsourced to countries with low labor costs, high polymer production capacities, and a general tolerance for occasional chemical smells wafting from industrial zones. Let us begin in Asia, where the majority of the world's plastic bags are born. China, long the epicenter of plastic goods production, boasts entire industrial parks dedicated to film extrusion, printing, die cutting, and stacking. Provinces such as Zhejiang and Guangdong house thousands of small to mid-scale plastic converters, the term for companies that take raw polymer pellets and turn them into something a marketing department can ignore. These facilities operate with conveyor belt precision, often 24 hours a day, managed by rotating shifts of workers in pale blue uniforms and the kind of safety signage that suggests optimism rather than enforcement. In India, Bangladesh, and Vietnam, the pattern repeats with local variation. India's bag industry, once booming, has faced ongoing whiplash from shifting national regulations, bans, partial bans, exemptions for thicker bags, and entire bureaucratic branches dedicated to interpreting what exactly constitutes a sherry bag versus a packaging film. The result is a workforce that adapts faster than legislation, producers pivoting to export markets when domestic policy turns hostile, then pivoting back when enforcement proves theatrical. At the top of the supply chain sit resin producers, petrochemical giants such as ExxonMobil, Dow, Sabic, Saudi Arabia, and Sinopec, China. These companies manufacture high-density polyethylene, HDPE, and linear low-density polyethylene, LLDPE, shipping it globally in granular form. These resin pellets are sold by the ton to converters who melt, extrude, and inflate them into the ghostly bubbles that eventually become bags. This upstream sector is capital-intensive, technologically advanced, and entirely indifferent to whether its output is destined for artisanal baguette carriers or dog waste. Then there are the machinery manufacturers. Companies in Germany, Japan, and Taiwan produce the extruders, winders, sealers, and die punchers that make the bags possible. A high-performance bagging line might cost several million euros and be capable of producing 200 bags per minute, faster if one agrees to accept a higher rate of minor defects and the occasional existential machine rattle. These machines are marvels of efficiency, albeit ones that rarely appear in public, because nobody wants to watch a robot punch holes in plastic for 12 hours unless they are very tired or very German. The economic structure of the plastic bag industry is, by design, invisible. Margins are thin, sometimes fractions of a cent per bag, and profitability relies on scale, automation, and bulk contracts. With supermarket chains, fast food conglomerates, and wholesaler logistics, the bags are treated not as products, but as overhead, something to be supplied, never considered, and definitely not discussed in marketing meetings unless an unfortunate animal gets involved. Labor, therefore, occupies an ambivalent position. In many factories, workers are paid by the hour to feed rolls of film, monitor print alignment, box finished products, and sweep polyethylene trimmings into industrial bins that themselves are made of polyethylene. It is repetitive work, often indoors, occasionally air-conditioned, and largely anonymous. Workers are not trained to think about where the bags go or how they are used. They are trained to check for seam consistency, print bleed, and tear strength. Most of them will never hold a branded grocery bag with a logo from the other side of the planet and think, I made this. In higher income countries, automation has largely replaced human labor in bag production. A facility in Germany or the United States might run with a skeleton crew, perhaps one operator per machine line, and a technician who responds to flashing lights with a laptop, and the kind of quiet authority one normally associates with bomb disposal units. Maintenance is everything. One misaligned blade or a speck of dust in the corona treatment unit can cause thousands of bags to fail quality checks. It is not glamorous. It is not televised. But it is, in a strange way, noble. The pursuit of mechanical consistency for an object destined to be forgotten in under 8 minutes. Further downstream, we encounter the handlers, the warehouse staff, freight movers, customs brokers, and truck drivers who ensure that pallets of polyethylene promise arrive precisely when the store begins to run out. Logistics for plastic bags is a minor miracle in predictive distribution. Because bags are cheap, bulky, and unprofitable to ship in small quantities, they are often delivered in massive lots and stored in backroom towers, shielded from sunlight to prevent UV degradation. The shelf life of a plastic bag, unexposed to heat and light, is nearly indefinite, a fact which brings no joy to warehouse managers already juggling perishables, promotional beach towels, and an unexpected shipment of novelty pineapples. And then there are the invisible costs, the externalities. Waste management systems around the world spend millions dealing with plastic bag contamination. Street sweepers remove them from drains. Landfill operators cover them with dirt and polite sighs. Recycling centers curse them as they jam sorting equipment with the ferocity of an optimistic squid. In coastal regions, cleanup crews funded by NGOs and volunteer guild remove thousands of bags annually from beaches, estuaries, and places no one remembers littering. Yet even here, jobs are created. Entire microeconomies exist around plastic bag reuse, resale, and reprocessing. In Nairobi's informal settlements, for example, bag washing cooperatives clean and resell used packaging to vendors. In the Philippines, upcycled bags are woven into mats, baskets, and strangely beautiful wall hangings. In San Francisco, banned bags are smuggled in with the same discretion one might reserve for contraband salami. The bag refuses to die, and in refusing, it sustains a complex, messy human web of making, moving, selling, folding, tearing, and sometimes regretting. Next, we shall turn to marketing, not the kind that sells the bag, but the strange theater of how brands, retailers, and entire nations tried to explain it, apologize for it, and occasionally dress it up in graphic design and empty slogans. Marketing a plastic bag is an exercise in restraint. It is a challenge not unlike advertising tap water or air. The product is necessary, invisible, and utterly lacking in ambition. And yet, in the second half of the 20th century, and well into the 21st, brands, supermarkets, governments, and graphic designers of variable optimism all tried, often desperately, to attach meaning to the polyethylene phantom. In its earliest incarnations, the plastic bag carried no branding at all. It was a functional membrane, translucent or milky white, its surface interrupted only by the occasional seam or stretch mark. But as supermarkets consolidated and branding metastasized into every cranny of modern commerce, the bag became a surface, a humble, crinkled billboard fluttering in the wind, accidentally announcing its loyalty to whichever retailer had most recently inserted apples into it. By the 1980s, the aesthetic of plastic bags had crystallized into something approaching a genre. Flat, bold text, often read, repetitive slogans, and an emotional tone somewhere between forced gratitude and municipal warning label. The American "thank you, thank you, thank you" bag, rendered in stacked Helvetica and occasionally punctuated with "have a nice day," became the default voice of budget commerce. Its optimism was hollow, its repetition vaguely threatening, and its cultural penetration absolute. It has appeared in films, art installations, and even the occasional PhD dissertation. It is, arguably, the most recognizable plastic artifact after the Lego brick and the Coke bottle. Supermarkets took advantage of the bag's exposure. Logos were emblazoned in massive font. Promotional messages were added in tiny print near the base. Loyalty slogans appeared: "Better value every day," "Fresh for you," proudly serving since 1973. It was branding by osmosis, a passive absorption of identity as the shopper wandered home, the bag flapping at their side like a commercial tail. But while the top half of the bag was all cheer and color, the bottom half often bore small cryptic messages in fine print. Recycling symbols, resin identification codes, usually the triangle with 2 for HDPE or 4 for LDPE, and warnings about suffocation. These served both legal and symbolic purposes. The suffocation warning: "This bag is not a toy. Keep away from children," became so ubiquitous that it evolved into a kind of postmodern slogan in its own right, appearing on t-shirts, art prints, and novelty mugs, as if the bag were trying, unsuccessfully, to be taken seriously. Some bags featured full-surface prints. These were more expensive to produce, as the flexographic printing process required precise tension control to prevent warping. A bag emblazoned with a high-resolution image of strawberries might look enticing at the factory, but after folding, creasing, and loading with lentils, it could resemble a horror film still from a fruit rebellion. Retailers learned to favor minimal designs with high contrast. Some outsourced their visual identity to third-party agencies, resulting in bags with abstract patterns, slogans in 6 languages, and confusing attempts at humor. The advent of environmental concern added a new layer of complexity. Bags began to feature green-colored ink, leaf motifs, and vague claims such as eco-conscious, less plastic, or the particularly brazen reusable, printed on single-use bags. These messages were rarely regulated, frequently unsubstantiated, and almost always ineffective in changing actual usage behavior, but they allowed both producer and consumer to feel momentarily reassured, like a child hiding behind a curtain, while believing themselves invisible. Government-mandated messages began appearing in some regions. In Ireland, the bag levy was accompanied by educational campaigns about plastic pollution, and certain bags were required to display tax information. In South Africa, post-2003 regulations led to thicker printed bags that declared their compliance with the 30-micron minimum thickness law, as if physical girth were a moral quality. In parts of Canada and the UK, bags started carrying disclaimers. Please reuse this bag. Recyclable where facilities exist. Your counsel thanks you for being confused. Retailers were caught in a bind. Banning bags risked customer ire. Offering them freely attracted legislative penalties and environmental criticism. Charging for them created awkward moments at the till. Some attempted to bypass the dilemma by creating aspirational marketing campaigns around bringing your own bag, complete with posters showing attractive people with perfect teeth, carrying canvas totes as though returning from an ethical utopia. The effect on actual bag consumption was modest. The effect on corporate self-image was profound. Smaller businesses, particularly in food service, face different challenges. Takeaway outlets, often reliant on low-margin deliveries, needed cheap, water-resistant, heat-tolerant bags. They had little interest in branding beyond the name of the restaurant and a phone number. In Southeast Asia, a genre of bag emerged specifically for soup and liquids, high-density, heat-sealed at the top, sometimes double-bagged with a knot. These bore no printing, yet became iconic through use. A bowl of feo in a plastic bag is both a culinary triumph and a fluid dynamics problem, wrapped in silence. Meanwhile, activist groups began producing anti-bags. These were reusable bags printed with slogans attacking the very idea of plastic itself. This bag is not made of oil. Plastic kills. I am not a bag. A surrealist nod to the 1960s art movements repurposed for checkout lines. Some were handed out at marches. Others were sold online to support environmental NGOs. Still others were co-opted by brands seeking an eco-chic aesthetic, their profits going not to turtles, but to quarterly dividends. The irony peaked when high-fashion labels began selling luxury plastic bags. Celine released a $590 clear PVC tote resembling a standard deli bag, emblazoned with Celine Paris. Balenciaga countered with a calfskin bag designed to resemble a blue IKEA Fracta. The line between parody, commentary, and commerce blurred entirely. Consumers queued to buy replicas of what they previously discarded without a thought. As a marketing object, the plastic bag became everything at once. Functional, disposable, symbolic, ironic, and ultimately expendable. It absorbed brand identity without asking. It carried slogans it didn't believe. It apologized for itself on behalf of industries that had no intention of stopping. And in all this, it became the purest expression of late-stage consumer design, an object that communicates everything and means nothing. Next, we will enter the scientific domain fully, the chemistry, material properties, and processing technologies that make the plastic bag possible, and why they also make it so difficult to eliminate. The chemistry of the plastic bag is an affair of elegant stubbornness. It is not complex in the way that rocket fuel or antidepressants are complex. It is complex in the way that a locked filing cabinet submerged in resin is complex. It looks simple, but refuses to budge under scrutiny. To the untrained eye, a plastic bag is a thin, crinkly sheet with handles. To the trained chemist, it is a crystalline polymer film formed from hydrocarbon monomers under high pressure and catalytic interference, a process that is, appropriately, both refined and intrusive. The core component of most plastic bags is high-density polyethylene, or HDPE. Polyethylene itself is the simplest polymer known to industrial civilization, consisting entirely of ethylene units, two carbon atoms double bonded and surrounded by hydrogen atoms, like a molecular hot dog with very firm convictions. Under the right conditions, specifically heat, pressure, and a catalytic system, these ethylene units open their double bonds and link together in long chains, forming polyethylene. It is, in molecular terms, a very tidy riot. There are several variants of polyethylene, each defined by its branching structure. HDPE has minimal branching, allowing its molecules to pack tightly in a linear fashion. This results in higher tensile strength, stiffness, and chemical resistance. LDPE, low-density polyethylene, by contrast, contains significant chain branching, which introduces flexibility, softness, and a certain molecular whimsy. LLDPE, linear low-density polyethylene, sits in the middle, combining moderate strength with decent stretch, and is often used in film blends to improve performance without increasing cost or inviting existential questions. The production of HDPE involves the Ziegler-Natta catalyst system, discovered in the 1950s by Carl Ziegler and Giulio Natta, both of whom were presumably unaware that their work would lead to a global proliferation of bag dispensers. The Ziegler-Natta system employs organometallic compounds, typically titanium chloride and aluminium alkyls, to enable polymerization at relatively low temperatures and pressures. The result is a resin pellet, translucent, waxy, and perfectly innocent until melted. These pellets are shipped to converters, the facilities that produce the actual bags, where they are fed into extruders, large steel cylinders that heat, compress, and extrude the molten polymer through a narrow die to form a bubble of plastic film. This bubble, often several meters tall, is inflated with air like a polymeric souffle and cooled by a ring of precisely controlled fans. The film is then collapsed between rollers, flattened, and wound into enormous reels, ready for sealing and cutting. The entire process resembles glass blowing, but with fewer berets and more static electricity. The film's thickness, clarity, and mechanical properties depend on a dozen variables: extrusion temperature, die gap width, cooling rate, draw ratio, and the precise recipe of the polymer blend. Additives are often included to enhance specific traits. Slip agents reduce friction between bags. Anti-block agents prevent the film from sticking to itself unless it wants to. UV stabilizers delay degradation under sunlight, though only slightly. The average plastic bag left in direct sunlight begins to photodegrade within weeks, forming brittle flakes that flutter away like confetti at a very sad wedding. Once the film is formed, it is typically subjected to corona treatment, a high-voltage electrical discharge that oxidizes the surface, increasing its polarity and allowing ink to adhere during printing. Without this treatment, logos would slide off like rain on waxed fruit. The film is then fed through cutting machines, where heat sealers form the bottom seam, and rotary dies punch out the handles. The bag is now recognizably a bag, although it has not yet been asked to hold anything except expectations. Material performance is measured using standardized tests. Tensile strength is evaluated by stretching the film until it snaps, ideally not in the customer's kitchen. Tear resistance is tested by nicking the edge and pulling, simulating what happens when a bag grazes a tin can. Dart impact resistance involves dropping a weighted hemisphere from a fixed height to see whether the film ruptures or bravely stretches. The numbers are recorded in megapascals and joules, though in retail they are translated more roughly as good, fine, and disastrous. One of the bag's most impressive traits is its specific strength. That is, the amount of load it can bear relative to its mass. A typical HDPE bag weighing 5 grams can carry over 10 kilograms. By comparison, a similarly weighted paper bag, if damp, can carry only regret. This efficiency is due to the polymer's molecular alignment, which when extruded and oriented properly, creates zones of high crystallinity, molecular neighborhoods where the chains lie neatly, aligned like overachieving students. These crystalline regions resist tearing and stretching, while the amorphous zones in between provide flexibility. The result is a material that is both strong and ductile, an industrial oxymoron that no one dares question, lest the bags stop working out of spite. There are, of course, limits. Bags degrade with UV exposure, mechanical stress, and thermal cycles. Cold temperatures make them brittle. Heat makes them sag. Moisture generally has no effect, which is both a benefit and a curse. Chemically, polyethylene is hydrophobic and resistant to most acids, bases, and solvents, which is excellent for carrying hot soup, but disastrous for biodegradation. The long, inert carbon chains are nearly impervious to microbial attack, and while some specialized enzymes have shown limited effectiveness, the bag remains, for now, largely immortal outside industrial intervention. Efforts to make biodegradable bags have largely focused on altering the polymer backbone or introducing additives that promote oxidation or microbial digestion. Oxo-degradable plastics, for instance, incorporate metal salts that catalyze breakdown in the presence of oxygen and UV light. This, however, often leads not to biodegradation, but to fragmentation, a process in which the bag breaks into smaller pieces without chemically disappearing. It is, in essence, a molecular game of hide-and-seek, and the environment rarely wins. Bioplastics, such as polylactic acid, PLA, offer an alternative. Derived from fermented plant starches, PLA is compostable under specific industrial conditions, typically 58 degrees, high humidity, and the presence of specific microbial communities. These conditions are found in precisely 0.03% of municipal composting systems. Outside of those, PLA behaves like a regular plastic bag with a diploma in hope. Chemically recycling polyethylene remains a distant but enticing prospect. Processes such as pyrolysis can break down the polymer into fuel or monomers, but they are energy intensive and require careful sorting. Mechanical recycling, grinding, washing, melting, re-extruding, works for clean, uncontaminated plastic film, but fails spectacularly when confronted with mayonnaise residue or emotional baggage. Post-consumer recycled HDPE often has degraded mechanical properties, leading manufacturers to blend it with virgin resin, thereby defeating the moral purpose. Thus, the plastic bag sits at the intersection of chemistry, engineering, and societal contradiction. It is durable, but disposable, recyclable, but rarely recycled, technically simple, but systemically indestructible. It is a triumph of materials science deployed in the service of immediate convenience and long-term ambiguity. Next, we will descend into its darkest destination, the landfill, the quiet geological theater where the plastic bag performs its final, almost imperceptible act. The landfill is not, as one might assume, a chaotic pile of waste. It is a stratified, meticulously engineered landscape of entombment, a modern sarcophagus for the unsorted ambitions of industrial civilization. Beneath the rolling hills and deceptive grass lies the post-consumer archaeology of our age, and among the coffee filters, broken toys, expired yogurts, and perfectly good intentions lies the plastic bag, quiet, crumpled, not remotely decomposing. Landfills, particularly in developed countries, are designed with the kind of attention to detail usually reserved for missile silos or awkward dinner parties. Layers of clay, synthetic liners, reshape collection systems, gas venting shafts, all are deployed to ensure that nothing within the landfill interacts meaningfully with the outside world. This is both a triumph of environmental engineering and a theological dilemma, for nothing inside a landfill truly returns to the earth. It merely sits, plastic bags, composed primarily of high-density polyethylene, do not degrade in this environment. They do not compost. They do not dissolve. They do not politely leave. Lacking sunlight, oxygen, microbial action, and the gentle abrasiveness of natural weathering, they remain molecularly intact, flattened and compressed into geological layers like leaves between the pages of a book no one will ever open. Some estimates suggest that a plastic bag in a sealed landfill could last 500 to 1,000 years. This is, of course, speculative, because landfills have not existed long enough to prove it. Time will tell, but only if it's in no particular hurry. Waste management systems vary globally, and with them, the fate of the plastic bag. In countries with advanced incineration facilities, plastic waste is combusted at high temperatures, typically between 850 degrees and 100 degrees, converting it into energy, ash, and flue gases. In theory, this reduces volume and recovers energy. In practice, it generates emissions, requires expensive filtration, and tends to provoke long-winded public hearings about dioxins, health risks, and whether anyone wants to live next to an energy from waste facility. In Scandinavia, this is considered normal. In most other places, it is considered suspicious. Where incineration is absent or unreliable, plastic bags enter the general waste stream and are buried. They are light, easily windborne, and notorious for escaping collection trucks, landfills, and open dump sites. In some cities, particularly those in the global south with overstressed infrastructure, open dumping remains the norm. Here, bags accumulate in ditches, along riverbanks, and in vacant lots. During heavy rains, they clog drains and exacerbate urban flooding. Their role in municipal disasters completely disproportionate to their size or original purpose. In rural areas, bags are often burned in open piles, releasing a cocktail of unpleasantness. HDPE, when burned incompletely, produces carbon monoxide, soot, and volatile organic compounds. The odor is recognizable, a plastic tang with notes of chemical despair. Repeated exposure in poorly ventilated areas has been linked to respiratory issues, headaches, and in one documented case, a goat refusing to enter a barn until the fire stopped. Attempts to ban bags from landfills have been largely symbolic. In the European Union, certain member states prohibit lightweight carrier bags from entering landfill, via landfill directives and mandatory separation schemes. However, enforcement depends on user compliance, sorting accuracy, and municipal funding, all of which are famously allergic to consistency. Even when separated correctly, plastic bags can contaminate other recyclable materials by wrapping themselves around machinery, obstructing optical sorters, and otherwise behaving like a clingy X. There have been experimental burial sites, including bioreactor landfills, which attempt to accelerate degradation through controlled moisture and gas exchange. In theory, organic waste breaks down faster and methane can be harvested. In practice, plastic bags act like little waterproof envelopes inside the waste matrix, preventing leachate flow and creating anaerobic pockets of microbial confusion. It is not unlike burying your laundry in a Ziploc bag and then being surprised when it does not compost. Some enterprising scientists have proposed embedding radio frequency identification, RFID chips in packaging, allowing waste to be tracked post-disposal. This idea was largely abandoned after trials revealed that the data generated was 1. Expensive, 2. Depressing, and 3. Mostly consisted of plastic bags sitting motionless for months inside transfer stations, awaiting decisions no one wanted to make. Meanwhile, landfill archaeologists, yes, that is a real profession, have excavated decades-old waste from test pits and research trenches. Among the findings, hot dogs that still resembled hot dogs, newspapers still legible, and plastic bags still recognizably plastic. The decomposition rate is not linear. It is glacial. A bag buried in 1987 may look less faded than one stuck under your car seat for a fortnight. Time, as it turns out, passes differently underground. From an economic standpoint, the presence of bags in landfills is both nuisance and cost. Lightweight, they take up volume without contributing to weight-based tipping fees. Their ability to migrate during tipping operations means they require additional containment measures. Many facilities have installed wind fences, tall mesh barriers that attempt to intercept airborne debris, a practice that works well for everything except plastic bags, which seem to treat containment as a personal insult. Legislative pressure to divert plastic from landfill has led to increased calls for a circular economy, a concept that sounds pleasingly like a utopia, where nothing is wasted and everything is reused. In reality, it is an economic model held together by infographics, high-level reports, and the fervent hope that someone, somewhere, will build the infrastructure to make it all possible. For the plastic bag, circularity remains mostly theoretical. It is technically recyclable. It is rarely recycled. It is theoretically reusable. It is routinely tossed. It is a perfect emblem of circular ambition in linear practice, and so the landfill swells. Not quickly, not visibly, but relentlessly. Each day more bags arrive, compacted into bales or loosely tossed atop coffee grounds and bureaucracy. They form layers, not of meaning but of material, awaiting an archaeologist or perhaps a mole with unusual taste to rediscover them centuries hence. They do not shout. They do not decay. They merely persist. In the following part, we shall abandon the underground and return to the skies, not metaphorically, but literally, to examine the plastic bag's unintentional second life as an airborne organism, traveler, and inadvertent performance artist. Above ground, the plastic bag becomes a migratory species, not by design nor with purpose, but with a kind of aerodynamic irresponsibility that renders it the most accidental of travelers. Lifted by breezes, caught by passing vehicles, or exhaled by overfilled dumpsters, the bag takes flight with a grace unbecoming of its origin. It is not aerodynamic. It is not elegant. And yet, in motion, it becomes strangely alive, a synthetic jellyfish writhing through the urban reef. This behavior is not anecdotal. It is well documented by municipal workers, airport runway crews, ornithologists, and, less enthusiastically, the staff of electrical substations. The bag's physical properties, low mass, high surface area, flexible structure, render it exquisitely suited for windborne transit. Once airborne, it can travel kilometers, snared briefly by trees, fences, or the side mirrors of emotionally exhausted delivery vans, only to be dislodged again by the next gust or startled crow. In urban environments, this phenomenon produces what is commonly referred to as urban tumbleweed, a phrase that evokes frontier nostalgia, but more accurately describes a polyethylene nuisance tangled in shrubbery. In cities such as Cairo, Delhi, Los Angeles, and Johannesburg, free-roaming bags have been documented as causing minor traffic accidents, visual pollution, and in one extraordinary case, the interruption of an outdoor wedding ceremony where a branded bag inserted itself directly into the kiss. Electric utilities have long considered the plastic bag a Class II airborne hazard, light enough to ascend during updrafts, but tough enough to cling once ensnared. Bags frequently land on power lines and transformers, where they melt, short-circuit, or dangle ominously until removed. Maintenance teams in some regions have adopted the term bagging out to describe the moment when a bag causes a line fault. Annual costs related to bag-induced power disruptions, while not often published, have been quietly incorporated into budgeting spreadsheets under the euphemism non-metallic external interference. Airports, too, have taken notice. In several incidents, windborne plastic bags have been mistaken for birds by radar systems, triggering unnecessary wildlife response protocols. At least one runway had to be briefly closed in 2013 when a bag, having escaped a bin at a fast food court, lodged itself inside a drainage vent and refused to leave until a man with a long stick and declining patience convinced it otherwise. Agricultural areas are equally afflicted. Plastic bags drifting across fields snag on barbed wire fences, drape themselves over irrigation systems, or wrap around the feet of livestock. Sheep have been observed attempting to eat them, perhaps mistaking the glossy sheen for edible packaging. Autopsies of dead cattle in rural Kenya and Ethiopia have revealed stomachs containing dozens of bags, not as a result of singular consumption, but due to repeated grazing in contaminated areas. The plastic does not digest, it accumulates. The term for this, when it reaches fatal levels, is plastic impaction, a cause of death that rarely appears in poetry. Beaches and coastal zones provide perhaps the most visible stage for the bag's aerial performance. Wind sweeping inland or offshore catches loose bags and propels them across dunes, into water, or over promenades, where they twirl with the theatrical flair of a depressed ballet dancer. Volunteers participate in regular beach cleanups, often retrieving hundreds of bags in a single event. Some of these are intact. Others are photo-degraded, brittle, translucent, their logos faded into spectral abstractions of capitalism. When plastic bags enter bodies of water, their aerial journey continues underwater. Floating just beneath the the surface, they resemble jellyfish, which is unfortunate because many marine species, including endangered sea turtles, eat jellyfish. Upon consumption, the bag does not digest, dissolve, or even apologize. It simply sits in the animal's stomach, preventing real food from entering, leading to starvation with all the indifference of a misunderstood parachute. The proliferation of bags in aquatic environments has led to a minor explosion in euphemistic taxonomy. In scientific literature, they are floating macroplastics. In policy documents, lightweight, flexible packaging waste. In legal statutes, single-use film-based polyolefin units. Only in common speech are they called what they are, bags in the wind. None of the terminology, however, changes the outcome. Once airborne, the bag is almost impossible to retrieve without human intervention, netting, or, in one documented case, a trained falcon named Nigel. Some municipalities have deployed bag traps, mesh fences, floating booms, and canal barriers designed to intercept airborne or waterborne plastic. These are moderately effective, but require constant maintenance, as bags have an uncanny ability to find gaps, climb surfaces, or entangle themselves into Gordian knots of defiance. When successfully captured, the bags are collected, compacted, and with considerable bureaucratic ceremony, reintroduced into the waste stream they once so elegantly escaped. Artists and photographers have also taken notice. The plastic bag has become a recurring subject in environmental art, caught mid-air, mid-fence, mid-misery. It is juxtaposed with animals hung from gallery ceilings, projected onto city walls. Some installations involve thousands of used bags stitched into massive quilts or suspended like flocks of synthetic bats. The message is always the same. This is what you've done. The audience, confronted by this tapestry of waste, nods solemnly, takes photos, and forgets to bring a tote bag to the grocery store the next day. And yet, despite the nuisance, the damage, the unintended poetics of its drift, there is an eerie beauty to the plastic bag in motion. Suspended mid-air, it catches the light. It flutters. It spins. It resists gravity briefly. It whispers of human carelessness with the grace of a disposable ghost. In the next part, we will return to the ground, to the household drawer, the back of the cupboard, the under-the-sink archive, where the bags, having completed their external adventures, await their second life in quiet, chaotic domesticity. There is a drawer, somewhere beneath the kitchen counter, behind the cabinet door that never quite closes unless encouraged with a specific hip movement. It exists. The drawer is not officially labeled, but its contents are unmistakable. Dozens, sometimes hundreds, of crumpled, folded, stretched, or knotted plastic bags. Some have been carefully nested inside each other, like polymeric Russian dolls. Others have been stuffed in blindly, forming geological strata of retail history. Welcome to the bag drawer, the domestic museum of intentions postponed. This phenomenon is global. Whether in Berlin, Manila, Minneapolis, or Nairobi, the bag drawer transcends culture and income level. It is not taught. It is not inherited. It simply forms like stalactites as a byproduct of repeated human behavior and vague future planning. This one might be useful. I'll keep a few just in case. It would be wasteful to throw it away. These thoughts, repeated across millions of kitchens, have given rise to one of the largest informal storage systems on Earth. The household reserve of polyethylene, the drawer's contents serve no standardized purpose. Some bags are destined for reuse, lining bins, carrying lunch, wrapping wet swimwear, storing dirty shoes, or containing items to be returned to uncooperative retailers. Others remain forever untouched, faded and brittle, awaiting a moment that never comes. Occasionally, a rare specimen is found, a bag from a long-defunct chain store, a holiday-themed design from a previous decade, or one that still smells faintly of the exotic soap aisle it once visited. These become accidental relics, evoking memory through plastic. There are regional variations. In the United Kingdom, the bag drawer is often a bag itself, a bag of bags dangling behind the pantry door or looped over the oven handle like a polyethylene noose. In Japan, where space is optimized and folding is practically an art form, bags are stored in rigid stacks, often sorted by size and color. In the United States, bags may be stored in repurposed tissue boxes, designated kitchen bins, or inside other bags with the desperation of someone trying to compress guilt into a manageable shape. The psychology of the drawer is complex. It embodies thrift, preparedness, nostalgia, anxiety, and denial. It is part contingency plan, part domestic confession. Surveys have shown that while most households have reusable bags, they also retain a supply of plastic ones, just in case. The case in question is rarely defined. Emergencies involving soup, leaks, or surprise possessions are common justifications. So too is the statement, well, we can't recycle them, so at least we reuse them, which functions more as moral hedge than logistical plan. Efforts to formalize the drawer's purpose have been numerous. Home organization blogs suggest folding methods: the triangle fold, the roll and tuck, the compact square. YouTube tutorials demonstrate ways to store 100 bags in a space the size of a grapefruit. Special dispensers have been sold, plastic holders for storing plastic, creating an elegant Ouroboros of consumer design. Some models attach to the inside of cupboard doors, while others sit upright like feed silos, offering a single bag at a time through an aperture that always seems slightly too small. Retailers, meanwhile, have attempted to monetize the drawer's guilt. Some offer loyalty points for bag returns. Others print recycling instructions on their bags, often with asterisks leading to fine print that reads, "where facilities exist," which is to say, almost nowhere. In rare instances, stores offer in-house recycling bins for used bags. These bins tend to be either empty or overflowing, rarely in between. The bags collected are baled, shipped, and ideally processed into composite lumber or plastic pallets. In reality, a fair number are exported, misrouted, or simply re-landfilled in someone else's postcode. Despite these efforts, the drawer remains stubbornly inefficient. Reuse rates for plastic bags, while non-zero, are inconsistent. A UK study found that only about 40% of bags stored at home are ever reused. The rest remain in stasis, their futures unclear. Unlike other forms of hoarding, bag accumulation is socially accepted, even encouraged. It does not trigger interventions. It does not make headlines. It simply grows, wrinkle by wrinkle, logo by logo, a silent archive of transactions past. Occasionally, someone will attempt to purge the drawer. This typically occurs during spring cleaning, a major life event, or after watching a documentary involving ocean currents and photogenic sea turtles. The purge is never complete. A handful of bags are always spared. The sturdy ones, the big ones, it seems too useful to discard. The drawer empties, briefly. Then it begins again. A bag is accepted at checkout. Another is added during a trip to the pharmacy. A delivery arrives with unexpected packaging. The drawer yawns and receives them all, culturally. The bag drawer has achieved a kind of mythic domestic status. It is joked about in sitcoms. It appears in comic strips. It is referenced in online memes, sometimes with unsettling accuracy. Me. I have too many plastic bags. Also me puts one more in the drawer. The phenomenon is so widespread that if ever a census of plastic bags were conducted, the drawer would be both sampling site and statistical anomaly. It is not a system. It is a confession in polyethylene. Children sometimes turn the drawer into a toy chest. Cats into a lair. Teenagers into a source of dubious lunch bags. Adults into a momentary triumph of reuse before re-entering the cycle. The drawer holds not just bags, but the tension between what we consume and what we pretend we might use again. In the next section, we will observe how governments and activists attempted to interrupt this cycle through regulation, incentive, prohibition, and other rituals of modern policy theater, and how in response the bag simply adapted. Regulation, when applied to plastic bags, has often resembled a theatrical production with an unclear script, rotating cast, and mixed reviews from the audience. The problem was visible, the villains portable, the optics appealing, and so, one by one, governments around the world stepped onto the stage and declared, enough. No more single-use plastic bags. Or rather, fewer. Or not those ones. Or only if they're thin. Or thick. Or thicker, but called reusable. Or taxed. Or banned, but not enforced. Or banned, then unbanned, then taxed again. You get the idea. The very definition of single-use plastic bag proved elusive. Should it be defined by weight, thickness, polymer type, intended use, actual reuse rate, emotional commitment? Regulatory frameworks around the world answered these questions with all the consistency of a child explaining a dream. Other countries followed. Bangladesh banned lightweight plastic bags in 2002 after they were found to clog storm drains and contribute to catastrophic urban flooding. Rwanda introduced one of the strictest bans in the world, enforced at airports and borders with the kind of seal usually reserved for contraband. The European Union mandated member states to reduce average per capita consumption of plastic carrier bags to 90 bags per person annually by 2019 and 40 by 2025. For reference, the average American used around 300 plastic bags per year at the time, while the average sea turtle used precisely 0. In the United States, where federal consensus is as rare as a fully recyclable takeout container, bag regulations have been largely state or city-driven. California was the first to enact a statewide ban in 2016. New York followed in 2020. Other states, Oregon, Vermont, Hawaii, implemented variations on the theme. Meanwhile, several states, including Texas and Florida, passed laws prohibiting municipalities from banning plastic bags, creating a fascinating paradox in which banning bans became a form of governance. Somewhere, a bag nodded in approval. Retailers responded with pragmatism. Some charged for bags. Others stopped offering them altogether. Many introduced thicker, reusable bags that, according to law, could no longer be considered single-use, often by increasing the thickness from 12 to 40 microns, a change imperceptible to consumers consumers but transformative in the eyes of a regulator with a digital micrometer. These thicker bags were marketed with green fonts, leafy logos, and hopeful slogans like "Stronger for the Planet," ignoring the fact that they were often used once and discarded, thereby accomplishing little besides statistical reclassification. A parallel trend emerged: the bag as luxury. With bans in place, retailers began offering bags for life, typically made of woven plastic fibers, emblazoned with seasonal artwork or moral slogans, and priced just high enough to make customers feel they were investing in the earth. These bags were indeed durable, and yet studies showed that many consumers simply forgot them, lost them, or accumulated them in quantities that would make a Victorian suitcase salesman blush. From a regulatory standpoint, plastic bag interventions fall into several categories: complete bans, lightweight bags prohibited outright, levies, a charge applied per bag, usually at checkout, material restrictions, bans on specific polymers, often targeting non-biodegradable types, design standards, requiring minimum thickness, strength, or number of potential reuses, extended producer responsibility, EPR, requiring manufacturers to fund end-of-life collection and recycling. Each of these has produced measurable, but often modest, environmental benefits. Reductions in litter, improvements in waste stream cleanliness, and heightened public awareness have all been observed. However, total plastic consumption often remains unchanged or even increases as consumers substitute bags with other types of packaging. The decline of lightweight bags, for instance, has coincided with a rise in small garbage bag sales, many of which are made from the same materials as the bags they replaced. Activist campaigns have accompanied legislation with varying degrees of subtlety. Photographs of marine animals entangled in bags, infographic showing bags outliving multiple human generations, videos of beach cleanups that begin hopeful and end in despair. These campaigns are not inaccurate, but they often simplify the issue into one of personal morality rather than systemic infrastructure. Say no to plastic remains an easier slogan than invest in circular economies and redesign municipal waste governance using blended policy instruments. Meanwhile, bag manufacturers have lobbied, adapted, rebranded. Trade associations argue that plastic bags are not inherently evil, merely mismanaged. They highlight lower carbon footprints compared to paper. They propose recycling schemes. Some have filed lawsuits against municipalities, claiming overreach, procedural errors, or violation of trade laws. Occasionally, they succeed. More often, they are politely ignored as policy grinds forward like a solar-powered steamroller. China's role has been particularly dynamic. After years of being both the world's largest producer and consumer of plastic bags, the country banned ultra-thin bags in 2008 and introduced a nationwide phase-out plan in 2020, targeting all non-degradable plastic bags in major cities by 2022, with rural areas following by 2025. Implementation has been patchy but real. Bags have become thicker, fewer, and more expensive. Market stalls now offer canvas sacks or waxed paper sleeves. Many shoppers bring their own. Some forget and carry everything in their arms, a gesture now recognized as an act of eco-penance. Enforcement remains the Achilles heel of most regulatory efforts. A ban means little without oversight. In some regions, inspectors patrol markets, issuing fines. In others, compliance relies on signage, peer pressure, or the threat of online shaming. A vendor offering illicit bags may be fined, or they may simply wink and hand one over beneath the counter, where contraband has always felt most at home. In the end, legislation has changed behaviors, but not uniformly and not without side effects. Consumers have adapted, often with mild annoyance or performative virtue. Retailers have complied, often with creative loopholes. Governments have regulated, often with mixed clarity. And through it all, the plastic bag has simply changed shape, thickness, nomenclature, and occasionally color, never disappearing, only evolving. In the next part, we turn to the final structural element of the bag's empire, the global supply chain, a journey from gas to granule to gusseted glory, tracking the transnational choreography that delivers bags into every shop, every drawer, every ditch. The global supply chain of the plastic bag is a choreography of petrochemistry, containerization, regulatory friction, and absolute indifference. It is not elegant. It is not secret. It is simply unnoticed. A flow of hydrocarbons rendered into form, stacked into pallets, shrink-wrapped, and distributed through a logistical system so vast and well lubricated that it operates invisibly until it doesn't empty. Every plastic bag, no matter how humble, is the final note in a planetary symphony of extraction, refinement, fabrication, and transit. It begins underground. Ethylene, the gaseous hydrocarbon used to make polyethylene, is typically derived from naphtha, ethane, or other light hydrocarbons produced during crude oil or natural gas refinement. Steam cracking, a process that involves heating hydrocarbons to over 800 Celsius in the presence of steam, breaks large molecules into smaller ones, producing ethylene along with a cocktail of other useful substances. This process is energy intensive and typically takes place in petrochemical clusters near ports. Houston, Rotterdam, Jubail, Dahish, or Dalian. The result is a liquid gas, colorless and aggressive, waiting to be polymerized. Polymerization occurs in dedicated polyethylene production facilities operated by companies such as ExxonMobil, Dow, Sabic, Borealis, or Sinopec, using either gas phase, slurry, or solution phase processes, each with its own catalytic tantrums. The ethylene monomers are linked into long chains. The result, polyethylene resin, produced in granular form. Each pellet is about the size of a lentil and far less edible. These pellets are cooled, dried, sieved, and loaded into massive silos or rail cars. From here, they travel by train, truck, or ship to plastic film converters. These are the facilities that transform polyethylene pellets into bags. Some converters are vertically integrated with petrochemical producers. Others are independent, operating under contract to wholesalers, supermarket chains, or packaging distributors. Their locations follow economic logic: low labor costs, proximity to resin suppliers, flexible regulation, access to ports. Thus, converters flourish in China, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, India, and increasingly in parts of Africa and Eastern Europe. Within these factories, the pellets are fed into hoppers, melted in extruders, and blown into film. The floating bubble towers described earlier. After cooling and flattening, the film is rolled, sealed, cut, and punched. Printing is applied either inline or post-process, depending on whether a bag will advertise a local butcher, an international grocer, or simply plead thank you in block capitals. The finished bags are then counted, stacked, and packed, often into cartons or larger bags made poetically of polyethylene. Finished units are palletized, shrink-wrapped, labeled, and loaded into 20 or 40-foot intermodal containers. These containers then enter the global shipping system, the circulatory system of the modern world, moving from inland container yards to coastal transshipment hubs via truck or train. Ports such as Shanghai, Singapore, Hamburg, and Los Angeles serve as exchange points where cranes the size of apartment buildings lift and shuffle containers like inattentive giants playing Tetris. Shipping times vary, 2 to 6 weeks for intercontinental routes, depending on congestion, customs, and weather. The carbon footprint of this phase is measurable but often ignored, as plastic bags are light and volumetrically efficient. Their bulk, not their weight, determines shipping cost, which is why some bags are shipped unsealed, allowing retailers to inflate and seal them locally, saving cubic centimeters in transit. Once ashore, the bags enter national distribution networks, central warehouses, regional depots, and finally, individual store backrooms. Here they are unboxed and either loaded into bagging racks or stored until needed. A typical supermarket may receive bags monthly in bundle of 500,000 or more, depending on footfall, customer behavior, and how many people remember their reusable totes approximately never. Retailers rarely purchase bags directly. Instead, they contract packaging suppliers who source, price, and manage inventory. These intermediaries ensure consistency of supply, regulatory compliance, e.g., thickness minimums or compostable certification, and price hedging in volatile polymer markets. The contracts are often long-term, multi-region, and ruthlessly optimized for cost. Branding and sustainability claims are added during procurement meetings, usually in the form of PowerPoint slides with leaves on them. At every step, the supply chain is lubricated by bureaucracy, import-export documentation, customs declarations, material safety data sheets, origin certificates, polymer content disclosures, and, increasingly, carbon audit forms. Larger retailers now demand life cycle assessments, LCAs, from their suppliers, outlining the environmental impact of each bag from cradle to grave. These documents are often based on models, estimates, and heroic assumptions about end-user behavior. Few include the drawer. Meanwhile, waste management companies prepare for the other end of the journey. In some cases, the very same firms that manufacture bags also operate recycling or waste handling subsidiaries. This is not hypocrisy. It is vertical integration. The same polymer that was extruded last year may, under ideal conditions and several miracles, return as a recycled component in next year's bag. More often, it becomes filler in a park bench, a composite fence post, or a spreadsheet justifying extended producer responsibility. It is worth noting that during supply disruptions, trade wars, pandemics, canal blockages, the plastic bag often becomes a proxy for broader infrastructural fragility. When shipments falter, bag inventories deplete rapidly. Retailers scramble to source local alternatives, which are often more expensive, thinner, or less compliant with brand guidelines. Customers, encountering unexpected bag shortages, either complain loudly or carry everything in their arms, radiating a sense of betrayal rarely seen outside breakup songs. The bag supply chain, like most globalized systems, is both resilient and absurd. It allows a product made from Saudi ethane, polymerized in Singapore, printed in Vietnam, shipped via the Suez Canal, and distributed through Rotterdam to end up cradling onions in a supermarket in northern France, only to be thrown away, reused as a dog waste carrier, or added to the drawer of delayed conscience. Next, we shall return from the warehouse and container ship to the bag's ultimate battlefield, the public discourse. How this flimsy, rustling object became an ideological lightning rod in debates over consumerism, environmentalism, and human self-delusion. The plastic bag, in its physical form, is a thin, soft rectangle with handles. In the public imagination, however, it has become a symbol dense enough to sink ships. It is held up in debates not merely as packaging, but as metaphor, scapegoat, punchline, and occasionally martyr. Rarely has an object so light carried so many projections. As environmental consciousness rose through the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the plastic bag became a totem of planetary guilt. It was not chosen for its actual volume of environmental harm, which, though non-trivial, is dwarfed by larger industrial flows, but for its visibility. The bag is trash you can see. It flutters. It tangles. It chokes. It offends the landscape in high definition. A bottle may sink. A straw may hide. But a plastic bag sails through the wind like a brightly branded accusation. Media seized upon the image. Nature documentaries showed sea turtles confusing bags for jellyfish. Beaches littered with polyethylene flotsam became symbols of unchecked capitalism. Editorial cartoons rendered bags as spectral monsters, wrapping themselves around animals and governments alike. Politicians posed with reusable totes. Schools organized bag-free days. Entire cities enacted bans as public gestures, not just of waste reduction, but of values. This shift in perception did not go unchallenged. Plastics industry groups mounted their own campaigns, pointing out the lower carbon footprint of plastic bags compared to paper, the hygiene risks of reusable bags, and the recyclability of polyethylene. In theory, if not in practice, they argued that banning bags was an emotional overreaction, that littering was the problem, not the bag itself. In response, environmentalists countered that blaming litterers while producing billions of single-use items was like blaming pedestrians for being hit by cars while selling everyone tanks. The debate polarized. On one side, bags were condemned as the apex of throwaway culture, designed for minutes of use and centuries of persistence. On the other, they were defended as efficient, practical, and unfairly maligned. Comment sections filled with fury. "It's just a bag," some said. "It's never just a bag," replied others. What began as waste management became moral theater. Some commentators lamented the focus on bags as a distraction, a small fix for a massive system. They pointed out that fossil fuel extraction, global shipping, and overproduction were far more pressing. But the bag was visible and therefore useful. It served as a lever for larger conversations, a plastic wedge in the door of denial. If we can't fix this, they argued, how will we fix anything? Others embraced the irony. The image of the bag from American Beauty, twisting in the wind to the strains of minimalist music, was reappraised as either a critique of consumer ennui or an unintentional preview of microplastic dispersal. Designers began incorporating reused bags into clothing, furniture, and gallery installations. One artist knitted a full suit from bags collected at a single-family home, a crunchy, translucent armor against both the cold and self-awareness. Meanwhile, individual responses range from performative to pathological. Some people cut out bags entirely, documenting their progress online with hashtags and spreadsheets. Others hoarded bags compulsively, convinced that one day they would be needed for lining bins, packing shoes, or insulating garden sheds. A few genuinely never used them, choosing instead to carry groceries loose, balancing apples and cans like hopeful jugglers crossing parking lots. National identities became entangled. France favored cloth. Germany regulated by thickness. Kenya imprisoned bag importers. The United States argued with itself. Japan engineered complex folding techniques for reusables, creating origami out of pennants. China, having once produced half the world's bags, launched a campaign of bans, substitutions, and compliance theater that left observers unsure whether victory had occurred or merely changed uniform. The ideological charge of the bag extended even into satire. Comedians mocked the bag drawer, the forgotten tote, the hypocrisy of buying organic vegetables and carrying them in petroleum. Cartoonists drew polar bears floating on bags instead of ice. A British sitcom featured a character who owned 97 reusable bags but never remembered to bring them, using plastic ones just one last time every week for years. In academic literature, the bag appeared as case study, metaphor, and heuristic. Economists modeled the effects of levies. Anthropologists traced bag rituals across cultures. Sociologists examined how bag bans revealed deeper fault lines in environmental identity. One political theorist referred to the bag as an ambient moral irritant, too small to address, too large to ignore. Throughout this, the bag itself remained unchanged. It did not care what anyone thought. It did not weep for turtles or cheer for legislation. It sat, folded or unfurled, under counters and in pockets, waiting for apples, bolts, shoes, or a third life as an improvised rain hat. It had no narrative. We gave it one. In the next part, we leave the realm of historical fact and enter the post-factual liminal zone. The final chapters of this exhibit shall explore not what the plastic bag is or was, but what it means, or might mean, when we are no longer looking. The final ledger entry in the factual history of the plastic bag does not arrive with a bang, nor even a satisfying rustle. It is not a conclusion, but a plateau, the quiet persistence of a product too small to revolt against, too large to eliminate, and too useful to sincerely forget. What remains is a record of where it stands now, in regulation, in culture, in design, in the gentle murmur of drawers not quite closed. By the early 2020s, global plastic bag consumption had declined in several regions, risen in others, and plateaued in many. The bans, levies, and public shaming campaigns had achieved partial success. In the European Union, average per capita use fell below 70 bags per year in multiple states. In Kenya and Rwanda, enforcement remained stricter than international arms treaties. In California, a ban led to a 70% drop in single-use bag distribution, but an increase in thicker branded reusable bags, often used precisely once. Recyclability remained the most potent myth. Technically, HDPE bags are recyclable. Practically, they are not, at least not in most curbside programs. The thinness of the film, the contamination with food, ink, or other polymers, and the high cost of collection mean that most bags are either landfilled, incinerated, or or escape into the environment. Industry-backed take-back schemes exist, often located near the entrance of large retail chains, where a labeled bin welcomes the bags home like a prodigal son. The actual fate of these collected bags is less welcoming. They are baled, sold, sometimes shipped overseas, sometimes stored indefinitely. Recycling rates remain in the single digits. Compostable and biodegradable alternatives made inroads, but each arrived with caveats. PLA-based bags degrade under industrial composting conditions, 58 degrees, high humidity, specific microbial cocktails, but not in home compost or landfill. Starch-based bags tear easily. Oxo-degradable bags fragment without breaking down chemically. Seaweed films, mushroom foams, and alginate-based wrappers garnered media attention, but remain niche, expensive, or structurally dubious. For every breakthrough, there were 10 setbacks involving soggy bread or suspiciously damp trousers. Retail habits shifted, but not uniformly. In wealthier countries, the reusable bag became an accessory, a fabric performance of conscientiousness. In lower income regions, bags remained default, both because of cost and because alternatives were not viable. Markets wrapped fish, fruit, and fried things in what was available. Asking a vendor in Jakarta to substitute cornice packaging for polyethylene is not just impractical, it borders on parody. Design, too, evolved. Newer bags featured micro-textured grips, expanded gussets, stronger bottom seals, and handles reinforced with double heat welding. Some were printed with QR codes linking to disposal instructions or self-congratulatory supply chain videos. The rise of e-commerce introduced courier bags, self-sealing, opaque, tamper-evident, waterproof, more envelope than carrier, but bearing the same polymeric lineage. Amazon alone is estimated to use hundreds of millions of such bags annually. Most are not recycled. Many are not even noticed. As an industry, flexible film packaging remains a growth sector. Global demand continues to rise, driven by population growth, retail expansion, and the unsinkable appeal of convenience. The plastic bag, or some descendant thereof, will not disappear soon. It may change color, thickness, label, or name, but it will remain. In warehouses and vehicles, in drawers, and in every place where something must be carried without effort, ceremony, or foresight. And so, the factual phase of this exhibit ends not with a transformation, but with a shrug. The bag endures, not because it is beloved, nor because it is unstoppable, but because it is good at what it does. It is a spoon of packaging, overlooked, essential, and difficult to improve, without replacing the meal entirely. In the parts that follow, we shall step sideways, not forward, into meaning, into interpretation, into what the bag reveals about us when we forget we are watching. A plastic bag, when observed outside its context, is almost metaphysical. It has no center of gravity. It has no inherent value. It is, in most cases, forgotten before it is even noticed. And yet, it travels. It persists. It accumulates. It becomes. Not in the way that art becomes, or language becomes, but in the quieter, more accusatory way that dust becomes by not being removed. What does it say, then, that the bag remains? Not as object, but as echo. It is not just packaging. It is not just pollution. It is a symptom, a diagnosis rendered in translucent polymer, crinkling gently behind us as we hurry away from our intentions. It was never meant to last, and yet it does. Not because it chose to, but because we never properly said goodbye. There is a theory in cultural anthropology, the residue of rituals, which posits that everyday objects can outlive the intentions for which they were created, becoming inertial artifacts. They no longer serve their original purpose, yet they remain woven into practice through habit, sentiment, or systemic momentum. The plastic bag fits this precisely. It is no longer a marvel. It is no longer novel. It is simply what is left after intention has burned out and design has become default. Consider its shape. It is a container, but barely so. It sags. It stretches. It never quite opens when you want it to, and yet it always splits when you don't. It resists categorization. It is too weak to be permanent, too strong to disappear. Its ambiguity is its triumph and our failure. We made it for convenience, but what we made instead was duration. In many ways, the plastic bag is our most perfect mirror, created to be used briefly, then hidden, denied, or externalized. We do not repair it. We do not memorialize it. We do not mourn it. We simply push it away, into the drawer, the bin, the stream, the landfill, the future. It is the physical manifestation of deferred consequence. It is what happens when you need something right now and don't want to think about later. Even its sound is accusatory. That dry, whispering rustle, like a confession made without breath. No other object in the house announces itself so softly and so often. A bag under the sink does not speak, but it implies. It implies forgotten intentions. It implies a different self, the one who remembered their reusable tote, the one who composted, the one who understood systems. The bag remains behind not because we love it, but because we were not quite the people we told ourselves we were. And yet, it is not malevolent. The bag has no ideology. It simply exists, in basements, in hedges, in the belly of a sea lion, in the folds of bureaucracy. It is a neutral observer, present at every impulse purchase, every bad weather contingency, every forgotten errand. If it judges us, it does so silently. Its crime is presence. Our crime is indifference. What is perhaps most astonishing is that the plastic bag, this bland, mass-produced item, has managed to outpace its own obsolescence. We have invented its alternatives. We have modeled its replacements. We have banned it, taxed it, blamed it. And still it returns. Not defiantly, but inevitably. It slips into the edges of systems. It fills the gaps in our plans. It serves when nothing else is available, and nothing else has been properly thought through. If the 20th century was a century of design, the plastic bag is its ghost. It carries nothing of itself, only the things we place in it. And yet, it carries us too. Our priorities, our shortcuts, our refusal to imagine beyond utility. It is a monument to the minimum viable solution. It is the baseline below which we quietly agreed never to fall, and then did anyway. In the gallery of objects, the plastic bag hangs uneasily. It is not admired. It is not studied with reverence. It is not nostalgic, but it is remembered, not fondly, not clearly, just remembered, the way one remembers a cough or a delay or a time they meant to be better. Next, we will press deeper into abstraction, not what the bag means, but what it teaches, about permanence, about attention, about the slow erosion of design into habit. The plastic bag does not teach through instruction. It is not didactic. It has no moral compass. no thesis statement, no ambition to elevate. And yet, it teaches nonetheless, not with clarity, but with accumulation. Like sediment, its lessons settle over time, compacted by use, denial, repetition. It is not the teacher we asked for. It is the one we left beneath the sink. What it teaches, above all, is scale. Not magnitude, not volume, but scale. The creeping expansion of small acts performed many times. 1 bag is nothing. 100 bags are a cupboard. 1 billion bags are a phenomenon. The bag reveals, through its own bland consistency, how systemic problems are built not from great evils, but from countless unremarkable choices, each one rational, each one reasonable, none of them particularly regrettable, until aggregated. It teaches invisibility, not through disappearance, but through ubiquity. The bag is not hidden because we can't see it. It is hidden because we always do. Like wallpaper, like background noise, like the hum of a fridge we only notice when it stops. Its lesson is that what becomes normal becomes unseen, and that what is unseen becomes unchallenged. It teaches compromise. The bag was never meant to last, and so we made it to fail gently, not catastrophically, but acceptably. We accepted its weakness, its unrecyclability, its clutter, its cowardly handles, because it worked well enough, and because alternatives required thought. The bag teaches how compromises accumulate, how mediocrity hardens into permanence, how convenience is not a vice but a solvent, slowly dissolving in tension. It teaches latency, not in the technological sense, but in the temporal. The bag is an object out of sync with its consequence. It is designed for immediacy, to be used now, carried now, disposed of now. And yet it stays in landfills, in trees, in gut flora, in the legal appendices of failed regulation. It teaches how modernity decouples action from aftermath, how we no longer live within the temporal arc of our decisions. It teaches us about ownership. The bag is ours until we're finished with it, and then it's someone else's. The sanitation worker, the municipal system, the ocean, the future. It reveals how property dissolves at the point of inconvenience, how quickly we reclassify something as waste when we are no longer actively benefiting from it. The bag is not just disposable, it is disowned, and it teaches pattern. Its very existence is a diagram of production, extraction, transformation, transportation, consumption, and abandonment. Every bag is a map of pipelines, refineries, shipping lanes, warehouses, tills, and trash heaps. We do not read the map. We carry it. We nod it. We throw it away, but it remains a cartography of systems too complex to explain and too convenient to question. Even its silence is instructional. The bag does not protest. It does not leak or scream or break down in dramatic fits. It quietly accumulates. Its protest is volume. Its resistance is endurance. It teaches that most environmental collapse does not arrive as spectacle, but as background, as something always there, always growing until the system can no longer pretend not to notice. And still it teaches. It teaches that most people are trying, that many do reuse it, that others bring their own bags, that guilt can produce change, even if the change is uneven. It teaches hope, but filtered through the fine mesh of entropy, that no system, no object, no habit is beyond transformation, but that transformation demands friction, and that friction is inconvenient, and that inconvenience is avoided. So it rests, the bag, having taught what it never meant to, waits in its drawer, beneath its peers, beside the old batteries and string. It knows we are not done with it. It knows we never truly meant to be. Next, we arrive at the penultimate part. Not the lesson, but the echo. How the bag has become a ghost in systems that no longer wish to speak its name, but still follow its outline in every attempt to replace it. The plastic bag has become a ghost not by vanishing, but by becoming foundational. Like salt in seawater, its presence is assumed. Its outlines linger in systems that have tried, loudly and performatively, to forget it. It is no longer always named, but its absence must constantly be designed around. This is the afterlife of an object that refuses to die, not haunting, but structuring. Walk into any modern supermarket and you will find the ghost of the bag in every aisle. The reusable bag rack, the signage about bringing your own, the cashier's reflexive question, "Do you need a bag?" asked with the hesitancy of someone discussing a forbidden topic. The infrastructure remains. The habits remain. Only the terminology has changed. We do not say plastic bag. We say carrier. We say unit. We say alternative. The ghost raises no objection. It is content to let us rename our rituals while repeating them. In design meetings, the bag is absent but present. Engineers discuss lightweight, flexible packaging formats. Consultants discuss low-touch customer experience transitions. Everyone avoids the word. Everyone designs around it. Retail systems must still accommodate customers who do not bring their own bags, despite years of encouragement. Inventory systems still order packaging by the pallet, not the principal. Waste systems still process the unmentionable quantities. The bag is everywhere, except in the language. Even in policy, it remains, often in clause, exemption, footnote. In one country, bags thinner than 50 microns are banned, except for food safety. In another, compostable bags are allowed, if labeled and certified under a specific code, which requires the bag to degrade in conditions not found in the country. In a third, the ban includes only free bags, so shops charge the equivalent of 0.01 euros, thus redefining free. These legal ghosts are drafted by people who know exactly what they are doing and sign them anyway. Digital systems, too, carry the spectral signature. Online shopping platforms must ask about bag preferences. Delivery apps have toggles. Include bag. Warehouses stock padded mailers made of polymer film. Clothing companies ship shirts in resealable LDPE pouches so elegant in their minimalism they might be considered packaging poetry. The word bag is seldom used. The thing itself is everywhere. Education campaigns promote a world after the bag, a post-plastic utopia where everything is recycled, everything is circular, and everything biodegrades into songs. But the campaign posters are delivered in bubble mailers. The reusable bags are shrink-wrapped. The giveaways are wrapped in film. The ghost smiles. It understands the difference between words and structure. The bag's echo exists in memory, too, in people who were children when the bans began, in those who remember bagging groceries with a specific technique, in the elderly who fold their bags into precise triangles and stack them in drawers like linen, in the reflexive motion of checking one's coat pocket before a market run. These are ghost gestures, involuntary, enduring, irrational, and yet completely functional. It even echoes in resistance, in the man who insists on double bagging despite the charge, in the woman who keeps a stash of illicit thin bags and distributes them at church, in the small shopkeeper who orders unbranded imports under a vague code and says they're not banned if they're reused. The ghost needs no vengeance. It has followers. Even art, that last refuge of clarity, has failed to exorcise the ghost. Installations using recycled bags attempt to make the invisible visible, but visibility was never the issue. The bag was always visible. It is noticed that has been the problem, and even now, in these carefully curated reflections, one suspects the ghost is not angry. It is amused because the bag, in its spectral state, has achieved something rare. It has revealed the elasticity of systems, how rules bend, how language bends, how intent bends, not because of malice or failure, but because the world moves through the path of least resistance. The bag has always been that path. It still is, even when renamed, and so it lingers, not in rebellion, but in accommodation, not as protest, but as memory. It is the shape our systems still take when no one is looking closely enough to ask if they be changed next. The final part. Not a conclusion, but a pause. A moment to let the ghost speak, not in crinkles, but in everything we did not mean, and still do. The plastic bag does not speak. It has no mouth, no language, no manifesto. But if it could, if somehow its rustle were allowed to condense into syntax, if the drawer beneath the sink could issue a single uninterrupted whisper, it would not accuse. It would not demand. It would not warn. It would simply ask, "Is this what you meant?" It would ask not with bitterness, but with the gentle confusion of a tool used for too long. It would point to its own properties, lightweight, efficient, cheap, and wonder how these became synonymous with shame. It would gesture toward its billions of siblings, scattered not by will, but by system. It would indicate the bin, the bush, the tide, the air vent, and then it would fall silent again, because the answer is not complicated. The answer is yes. This is exactly what we meant. We just didn't mean to mean it. The bag is a design that tells the truth, not the truth of ethics or intention or marketing, but the truth of outcomes. It is the result of everything we prioritized. Speed, convenience, volume, price. It holds those values in perfect proportion. It is not accidental. It is not a glitch. It is the world made portable. What unsettles is not its persistence, but its accuracy. The bag never claimed to be sustainable. It never called itself circular. It never bore slogans unless we printed them. Left alone, it was brutally honest. It said, "I will carry your objects. I will cost you nothing. I will go wherever you leave me." That was the deal, and we accepted. It is fashionable to ask what legacy we will leave behind. Cathedrals, books, satellites. Possibly not. Possibly it will be plastic bags, geologically compressed into layers of translucent intention. Future archaeologists, or whatever replaces them, will dig through our strata and find not monuments, but membranes, not declarations, but wrappers, not myths, but fragments of groceries. And yet, even here, there is no tragedy. There is only continuity. The bag is neither good nor evil. It is a surface. We projected onto it. We blamed it. We redesigned it. We tried to forget it. But what we never quite did was replace it. because to replace it properly, we would have had to replace the habits that required it. That is the quiet secret of the plastic bag. It cannot be substituted. It can only be outgrown. And perhaps one day we will. Perhaps the drawer will empty and not refill. Perhaps the supermarket will stop asking. Perhaps our systems will adapt faster than our convenience. Perhaps we will design something better, not because we are forced to, but because we finally want to. The bag is waiting, not expectantly, not resentfully, just waiting. It rustles when we move past it. It stirs when we open the drawer. It reminds us, without malice, that it is still here, not by accident, but because it worked. And when it is finally gone, if it ever truly goes, it will not leave a silence. It will leave an outline, a negative space in our systems, our habits, our cupboards. And in that space we will place something else, or nothing, and begin again. The exhibit ends here. The bag remains.